Friends, I welcome you to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It is not difficult for you, but it is pleasant for me. And we're starting. I stood in the doorway, looking at the screaming red harpy. The torrential rain had plastered her hair to her face in long strands. Despite the cold, lashing rain, she continued her furious tirade. To be honest, I couldn't hear all the words because of the heavy rain and the dull rumbling in my own ears. Nevertheless, I understood the point. My wife Beth had an affair with the Red Witch's husband, Justin. The furious redhead Nicole, Nikki for short, wanted me to stop it. A couple of months ago, my wife called me when I was on a rare business trip, and while I was watching the cold rain pounding on the dirty window of a hotel room, she told me that she wanted to divorce after 9 years of marriage because we broke up. I've only been gone a couple of weeks, and we've only been living together for 5 months since I came out of the army. I didn't even know we had problems. She never said a word. As far as I could tell, she was at least emotionally connected to this asshole for 3 months, and probably finally managed to perfect him while I was on a business trip. I only managed to piece it all together a week before the redhead showed up on my doorstep, and I still had no proof. And I was trying to come up with a plan. My wife agreed to the consultation long before I found out about this affair, but in fact, she stopped attending our sessions after the second one. I suspected that she was trying to get the counselor to reconcile me with the breakup. I think the main reason for the proposed counseling period was so that she could tell her family and friends how hard she tried, especially her parents. Her parents' attitude towards her was very, very important to her, perhaps the most important thing in her world. So she waited, continuing to date this asshole and live on my salary, until she was sure that it would look good and that he was ready to leave his wife and child. Beth and I had 2-year-old twin girls, Angie and Amy. She happily left me to babysit them as soon as I got home so she could go to the gym or run, both of which she did often enough to be in the best shape of her life. But after the gym, she and the asshole would slip off somewhere to make love. Unhappy is hardly the right word for how I felt. Every time I tried to solve problems or talk to her about something, she turned into a screaming rage, denying any mistake and blaming me for everything. She spent a lot of time telling me how hard it was for her to watch the kids at home while I was at work, and that I was just trying to use the kids against her. None of this was true or really made any sense. Working full-time, I worked with the children more than she did. Considering a divorce with a lawyer was depressing. Adultery was essentially irrelevant in our state. It had no real effect. And Beth obviously knew full well that the courts almost always award custody and child care payments to the wife, regardless of her behavior. Maintenance for several years was also the norm if there were small children, so the ex-wife could stay at home and be a good mother instead of rushing to work. So, there stood a squealing, ugly, red-haired, tall, and slightly awkward person, with a beak-like nose and thin, angry lips, with several extra pounds after the birth of a 6-month-old child, which frankly did not sit well on her lanky body. Anger and the cold rain had made her pale skin blotchy. I couldn't get a word in, so I stepped back, holding the door open, and waved at her. I've already realized that it makes no sense for the neighbors to hear a woman yelling at me standing outside. She followed me, loudly humiliating my manhood, while I went to the dining table and pulled out a chair for her, and then sat down myself and waited. Gradually, the anger turned into bitter tears, then into trembling sobs, then finally into sobs. The head sank into his hands on the table, and the hair formed a mound of wet, limp, dark copper. I waited a little longer until the runny nose stopped. "Are you done?" "Quiet." She looked up at me with reddened eyes, sniffed twice, but said nothing, and I continued. "If I could do something, I would do it. I don't like it any more than you do." I went on to explain how the law works and what a disadvantage I am in. You have to kick her cheap ass, without letting go of anger. Not that I blame her. Great plan, then I could end up in jail, and then on the street. We sat in silence for a while until I got up and made hot tea. The rain was cold. I tried my best not to stare at her. She might not have been pretty, but the boobs had a really good stance, and it was pretty damn strong for me. She shuddered as the hot tea hit her system. Damn, I didn't feel so cold. Shit again. It's not too diverse. She hugged herself. I sighed inwardly. It was the coolest thing I've had in the last 4 months. I can get you a sweater or something. Which one belongs to this cheater? I found one of my hooded sweaters, which she quickly pulled on and buttoned up. She began to squirm, pulled her arms out of the sleeves, and then, after several rotations, she took off her soaked shirt and bra from the bottom and put her arms back into the sleeves. I picked up the laundry and threw it in the dryer. At least I noticed that the show had started again. The sweater alone was thinner than the bra and shirt combined. I took the towel and handed it to her. Dry your hair. She wiped her hair. It was strange to feel attracted to anything at that moment. Damn, I'd almost forgotten what it was like to have a boner, so I let myself watch. Eventually, her hair dried up and she stopped. I hate them, she growled. Me too. I never saw this coming. At that moment, I saw a flash of pain that was as intense as my own. I can't compete with her. She's in great shape and great. I got fat from having a baby. She wasn't really overweight, maybe 10 pounds or so. She was just out of shape, but neither was I. But she was right about something. Beth was as beautiful, blonde, blue-eyed, slender, and graceful as a woman can be. Still, Nikki needed to hold on to something. She's in good shape because she has time to go to the gym and run. And you're not fat at all. A tiny glint of something other than suffering burst out. So, what's next? I shrugged my shoulders. I have no idea. Every time I play this game, I go out alone, broke, and she controls access to the children. I told her everything I could put together. And if you had proof of infidelity, it doesn't matter in court. They don't give a shit here. But the same thing that hurts me should work in your favor in a divorce. I don't think so. Justin works for his cousin at a construction company. Most of his salary is hidden. So there is not much official money for alimony for me and the child. She continued, I just want to crush them. I thought about it for a minute. How can we harm them? She shrugged her shoulders. I began to feel a little better. I finally had an ally in this goat situation. Seriously, everyone makes mistakes. We just have to find them. A salary under the table from his cousin might be a good starting point. I thought about it. Some of the shoes that had just appeared in Beth's closet looked very expensive. This money had to come from somewhere. There's something going on. Beth is spending incomprehensible money. She nodded with the faintest hint of real energy. We could do it. I grinned at him. It's going to be easy. We're going to get the kids together and sneak around like a bad mix of Magnum PI and Brady Bunch. No, my sister Angie could look after the kids. She's looking after Jamie right now. She paused, looking a little thoughtful. So, where are your children? They're sleeping upstairs. She looked around the room, her gaze stopping at the closed front door. You have sweatpants. I'm all wet. I pulled out my sweatpants when she took off her shoes. I pointed to the bathroom, but she turned her back on me, unzipped her wet jeans, pulled off her jeans and underwear and got out of them. Then she began to wipe her legs and buttocks with a towel quite slowly. The invitation was pretty obvious, and I could almost hear her nerves crackling. I could feel her taking risks. She already felt rejected. I felt a surge of anger, but anger at my wife for setting me up like that. Nikki kept talking. I can't believe Justin would do this to me. I stepped forward and put my hand on her bare thigh. She trembled and her voice got stuck in her throat, but she didn't pull away, so I put my other hand on her hip. I don't like you, but I hate him. She pushed me away. When everything was quiet, she looked at me and grinned maliciously. I said nothing, picked it up and put it on the table. After I cleaned up, I threw her jeans into the dryer along with her shirt and bra, and we sat at the table for a few minutes, drinking tea that was already cold. She looked at me sullenly from under a disheveled mop of red curls. You knew this was going to happen when you invited me in. Actually, not until you took off your jeans. She giggled like a little girl. It was a little unnerving. I was afraid that you would refuse. I grinned, as it seemed to me, for the first time in ages. How can any guy refuse this? Justin has not shown any interest in me or the child since the birth of the child. I shook my head. I'd heard of such things before, but before I could say anything, she continued, So how could Beth or any woman turn her back on that lovemaking you just gave me? You're a hell of a lot better than Justin. I have no idea. She just lost interest in me. Justine is younger, and she feels old because of the kids, I think. This has not happened since the twins were born. I think she felt like she needed to be more of a mom to me or something. Nikki giggled again. A little creepy, I thought. I grinned at him. At least Beth didn't have one. She became even more animated. Really? It hurt, but I'll treasure it, especially when that asshole tells me to sleep in Jamie's room tonight because he's tired of exercising. I can't believe you can't control your cheating girlfriend. I don't like you anyway. Bastard. There was anger in our words, but we both knew that it wasn't really directed at each other. If you really want to do something about it, see if your sister can look after my kids with yours tomorrow night. And we'd better get this over with. They'll be home in about an hour, and I need to clean this room a little bit. You'd better use an air freshener, because it smells like hot, sweaty lovemaking in here. She pulled on her clothes and ran out of the house. I cleaned the room thoroughly and put the towels in the washing machine along with my clothes. When Beth returned home, I found it surprisingly easy to avoid late-night discussions. The arguments we always had when she denied something and lied about everything. She seemed a little taken aback by my lack of attitude. She also seemed to notice the spotlessly clean kitchen. I think she commented on the work of the air freshener, but to be honest, I didn't care. I was on edge. She was just as embarrassed when I missed an almost ritually unsuccessful attempt to kiss her goodbye when I left for work the next morning. I didn't even try, and I could see that it took her by surprise when I just headed for the exit. Anyway, I was going to stop sitting and feeling miserable and get it over with, as it happens. At work, I arranged to borrow a friend's car for a few months. Nikki's sister, who looked embarrassingly like her, stayed to watch the children at her house. Nikki and I went. We planned to inspect the trailer of his cousin's construction company. If there was something illegal there, the trail could have started there. She grimaced slightly as she got into the car. My ass still hurts. Just like my kitty. Don't think you're going to get anything today. I raised an eyebrow. Tenderness doesn't seem to be quite on your mind. She smiled slightly, despite her best efforts to suppress a smile. I noticed that for the first time since we met, she was wearing a little makeup, although it was bad. I decided to change the plan and went to the mall. We tried to find something to talk about, but we had little in common, so the conversation went on in fits and starts until we drove into the parking lot of the mall. She looked puzzled. Are they here? No, but I think we want to hurt them, so there are a few small things that need to be done. What are you talking about? I rolled my eyes. It's amazing how little Nikki and I have in common. She caught my sardonic gaze. I don't like you. In general, I don't like you either. Bastard. I led her to the makeup counter at Macy's. She stared at me menacingly. Think of it as a disguise. Over the next hour, the two women hovered over her and tried a million makeup combinations, resulting in a surprisingly presentable Nikki, whom they taught to apply their products. This will do. The set cost me $100 of grocery money, but I just won't have lunch at work for the next month, and everything will be fine. We went back to the car, and she was clutching a small makeup bag like it was the Holy Grail. She didn't want to like it, but she liked it. Well, what does it all mean? If we want to hurt them, you need something Justin wants. Something that he seems to have lost. And I need something that Beth will resent and be jealous of. It will be you. You hide your makeup when you come home, and you only use it when you and I go out. She looked puzzled, and I explained my whole plan to her. She sat for a full minute, saying nothing. Damn it. It's a little complicated, and it will take a long time. I shrugged my shoulders. Do you have a better plan? She smiled a little. No. She asked me to come to my house to wash off my makeup so that Justin wouldn't notice. She went into the bathroom and came out a couple of minutes later with a towel in her hands. She was wearing nothing but an evil smile and makeup, which she had to wash off. The evil gleam in her eyes told me everything I needed to know about her intentions. I looked at her. I thought you told me not to expect anything. It would be a shame to waste this cosmetics. She dropped the towel without ceremony. My verbal consent was apparently not required, as she quickly knelt down. She kept looking into my eyes, and when she moved to sit on me, she noticed. I like makeup. Eventually, we finished and headed to her sister's house. Nikki enlisted her sister as an accomplice. She obviously never loved Justin, and we're going to really need her help. Over the next few months, we more or less worked on ourselves. I worked at work at lunchtime. She worked at home, and we worked together in the basement until Nikki lost baby fat and strength and everything else. and I also became very strengthened. We hid it from our self-centered spouses by wearing baggy clothes and just dodging. Anyway, they didn't pay much attention to us. We also made love at least 5 or 6 times a week, more than I've ever gotten from Beth. We were both the kind of people who stayed at home with our family. That's why we decided to change it. By a whim of fate, my basement turned into a dance studio. None of us understood a damn thing about it. But the magic of YouTube prevailed. We had a lot of free weekends and evenings, as our spouses continued to ignore us. We learned the basic dance steps, then the more advanced ones. We really enjoyed dancing salsa, but we had to save it for the rest of our routine. First of all, because in the end we would have made love right on the floor. Each. Damn. One thing I realized pretty quickly, I was playing with fire. Nikki was not very stable and had the temperament of a wild Doberman pinscher. Her mood changed without warning, and almost anything could trigger a wave of gratuitous anger. All this shit with Beth and Justin broke something important, one of those fences of sanity that we trampled on. I've always tried to keep an eye on her all the time. Her love for children was overwhelming. The element of dislike in our relationship meant that nothing was too rude or too dirty for us, and we both took advantage of it. She still called me a bastard, and I still called her a fool. But those words were, if not exactly loving and sweet, then strangely affectionate. But it was all for us to make us feel better. There was real work to be done, and we had to do it very, very carefully. Nikki made up an excuse to visit the construction company's trailer during the day and managed to film everything on her mobile phone. It turned out that her cousin was too stingy to buy an alarm system. We slipped in there 5 times, photographed every document in every drawer of the filing cabinet, and began to look through the documents bit by bit. More useful information was found in Justin's desk and Beth's purse. After a while, neither of us argued with our spouses, which was a problem for Beth. She really seemed to skip the arguments and tried to start arguments for no reason, but I never fell for the bait. Well, almost never. To be honest, after making love to Nikki all day, I didn't have the energy to argue. It took me a while to realize that Beth was probably using conflicts to justify her terrible behavior to herself. Every day she became more and more confused. Justin, on the other hand, seemed to think that Nikki had completely given up. Also, I got a good break on the money front. I got my $2,000 deposit. I invested this money in a vacation bungalow at a Mexican seaside resort to take Beth there for our anniversary, an event that obviously won't happen. I didn't expect them to refund the money, but they did. Customer relations, I think. This money will come in handy. When Beth started making excuses to stay the night with Justin, Nikki and I started going to a dance club, gradually trying out the dance moves we had learned. It was fun, but it was also stressful. Nikki's unpredictability was constantly weighing on me. She was irritable at the best of times and could go from joyous mood to almost psychotic anger without any warning if provoked. One particular night was almost a disaster and reminded me how careful I have to be. We were cut off by a couple in a small club somewhere in the wilderness. I was dancing with a girl, a pretty little blonde from the support group, while the guy was obviously trying to put his hands in Nikki's miniskirt. She talked him out of it twice, but he insisted, and I just caught her by the hair when she lunged at him. I said stop. Her claws almost grazed his eye, leaving bloody marks on his cheek. With a little blonde on one side and a hissing, angry Nikki, I expected disaster immediately. The guy quickly backed away, eyes wide open, while Nikki slowly turned her back to me, wrapping her long leg around my hips, pressing her groin tightly against me. Bastard, you pulled my hair. It hurts. She paused and then purred. You really know what I like, don't you? She looked at the blonde standing next to me and winked at her. You can get a lot better than this guy. You deserve better. He's an asshole. We went outside at a fairly brisk pace. It seemed reasonable considering the 3 guys in safety t-shirts heading our way. The parking lot was full of cars, but there were no people 2 rows down. I saw a scratched guy and 2 other guys get out. He went to Nikki, and his friends went to me. Nikki smiled. I don't understand. I introduced myself to you. For this shit, your boyfriend can watch me get what's in your panties. Nikki stopped as if she was scared, and he reached out to her, preparing to grab her hands. But I saw the manic gleam in her eyes when I felt the biggest of the 3 come up behind me. Nikki lunged not with her hands, which he grabbed, but with her teeth, plunging them deep into his face. He screamed in horror and pain. I turned around. I wasn't an MMA champion, but I was more than familiar with fights, and I saw the furious look in Nikki's eyes, so I was ready. The big guy was expecting a fight or a blow, but he was distracted by a friend's scream, and he was completely knocked down when I hit him hard in the face with my elbow. As he was expecting a wild punch, he dived straight into an elbow that cracked his nose. He fell down. The second guy stepped forward to pull Nikki away from her screaming victim. So I hit him on the back of the leg, just below the knee, and he fell to his knees. I grabbed his head and threw him back like a football, letting him clink on the asphalt. Nikki's victim tripped over a curb and covered her face, which was gushing blood. A huge mistake. Nikki spat out a mouthful of flesh and drove her sharp heel into his groin. His scream went beyond human hearing. I yanked her back when she was about to punch him in the chest. "Nikki, stop." She gave me a wildly defiant look, then stopped and smiled. Blood covered the lower half of her face and most of the front of her white t-shirt. Her smile was full of blood, a scene from one of those epic Hammer Studio vampire movies. She turned around and put her hands on the nearest car, standing almost over her suffocating victim. "Take me, here and now, and I'll let him go." Then she saw the heartbroken blonde and walked towards her. I wanted to grab her and run away, but I knew it would cause rage, and if I didn't get her out of here quickly, we'd both be in jail by morning. She walked over to the obviously paralyzed blonde and stood over her. "Nikki, behave yourself. She didn't do anything wrong." Nikki looked at me and smiled. Her face was still a bloody mask of horror. "Oh, I know." She pulled the blonde to her and kissed her hard. I was about to intervene when I realized that the blonde was passionately kissing her back. Nikki slowly released her. The blonde was staring at her as if hypnotized, and her face was stained with her boyfriend's blood. "Trust me, you can find a lot better than him." As soon as we got in the car, Nikki took off her t-shirt and wiped her face. An ambulance rushed by about 2 miles away. I didn't have to guess where she was going, and I could only hope that no one had written down our numbers. I pulled into the parking lot to give Nikki my shirt, but dressing wasn't her immediate interest, so I reclined the seat and let her unzip and ride me until she was satisfied. It took a long time. My pants were soaked in her juices even before she finished. She was silent for a few minutes and then commented, "I really screwed up, didn't I?" We're all like that in a way. Although I really broke away from it. It felt so good to hurt him. "Yeah, I noticed. This is a bit disturbing in the spirit of Hannibal Lecter. Hurting him was like making love. I was able to just let out all my anger. He deserved it." "Well, I'm not sure the law would agree, but I think his girlfriend was okay with it." Nikki giggled. "Shit, I'm competing with someone." She paused. "Seriously? About causing pain? Don't let me do this again. Promise me." Very serious. Tears glistened in her eyes. "You were defending yourself." "I know, but that's not the point. I wanted to hurt him. So much, so much. If it happens again, what if I can't stop? What if I can't find my way back?" She suddenly spoke like a lost little girl afraid of the dark. It honestly scared the hell out of me. Nikki probably needed real help medication, hell. She probably needed checks. We did the paperwork. The brutal attack in the parking lot was attributed to a gang of 6 men and a Hispanic woman. The witness was a blonde, whose real name was Amber. I had to laugh about it when I showed Nikki the papers. "Sue, it looks like you've made an impression on Amber after all." Nikki smiled. She seemed nice. "Strawberry lip gloss. Do you like girls?" I didn't think that was the case. I was just messing around with her at the club, but parking is a completely different story. She wanted me, I felt it, and it made me want her. I looked her straight in the eye while you were using me, and she wanted me to use her. I saw it in her eyes. And since you and I have been together, I just don't have any boundaries. However, after this incident, Nikki seemed to take care of herself. It got better. Slowly, unevenly, but gradually getting better. I saw her struggle to hold the demon when it appeared. Sometimes she even won. Nikki's sister couldn't look after the children every night. So Nikki often brought Jamie in, and we practiced putting them to bed. As we stood in the doorway, checking them out, I sometimes stole glances at Nikki and was surprised at the softness of her expression. And sometimes she caught my gaze on her and smiled sadly, softly, half smiling. At such moments, her demons seemed very far away. I knew that sooner or later something would happen. Eventually, Beth came across me shirtless, noticed that I had lost weight and gained new muscles, and commented on it. I didn't turn it into an argument, put on my shirt, and left the room. Most of all, I didn't want her to see Nikki's nail marks on my back and ask from last night. Beth's increased suspicion meant that we had to move on to the next stage. I told Nikki that. She rolled her eyes at me over her shoulder. At that moment, I was up to the hilt in her ass. So a few days later, instead of doing sports, we had a car and a nice digital camera that we borrowed. And when Beth and Justin left, we quietly followed in the distance. Nikki checked the receipts and credit card bills until we figured out their structure. Beth was careful, but in Justin's mind, Nikki was depressed, unable to defend herself, so he was careless and stupid. Justin's parents had a small cabin on the shore, hidden in the woods. It was a bit dilapidated, but judging by the mileage of the car, that's where they went on Fridays when they completely skipped gym classes. We drove off the road and quietly moved towards the hut with the camera. There were no curtains, so it was not difficult to find them and look at them. By the time we took up position, they were already lying on the bed. I took pictures carefully and quietly, and Nikki and I watched. When Justin started to pull down, Beth jerked her mouth away, catching most of the spray on her face and on her hair. I saw her scolding him for not warning her, but he just laughed. I felt Nikki fumbling with my jeans, pulling them down. Maybe I didn't fight her that much. It didn't take long, given the tension of the situation, and when she had swallowed every bite, she leaned back with a very smug look and let me take a few more pictures. Since we had to walk back to the car, I let some air out of one of Justin's tires to slow them down in case they tried to leave early. We left the film in the darkroom, which specialized in discreet one-day photographs, and then went home. Beth arrived much later than usual, with disheveled clothes and hair, giggling. Nikki told me the next day that Justin had changed a tire and then picked up a nail on the road on the way home, as a result of which I had to pathetically stomp in the rain to a gas station 4 miles away. Over the next week, we talked about what we wanted. Nikki surprised the hell out of me, but in the end I agreed. We kept quiet, and then took our big step about 3 weeks after we collected our evidence. Beth and Justin always disappeared all day on Saturdays, but Nikki and I put together their pattern. First to the gym, then to the shower cabin, then to the nightclub for dancing and parties. They usually returned home around 6 or 7 a.m. on Sunday. This time, though, it was a little different. As soon as they left, we left the kids with Nikki's sister and left. First, we went shopping. Nikki chose a form-fitting dark emerald dress with a plunging neckline and a very short hem. The emerald green color really set off her hair. I was wearing a dark gray suit with a black shirt. I took her to a hair salon and told them to go for it, hair and makeup. After getting dressed, we headed to the club. We entered as if this place belonged to us. Technically, the bouncer was supposed to detain us. She was wearing a tissue paper thin dress that showed almost everything. It was obvious that she didn't have a stitch underneath. When the light fell directly on her, you could even see the tiny heart into which she had shaved her pubic hair. Since part of the bouncer's job is to make sure the crowd is interesting, they let us through without even asking for a card. We were the first on the dance floor. Then we moved on to the main event. Justin and Beth sat at the club's marital table in the corner every Saturday. After dancing a few songs, we headed to their table, Nikki holding my hand at full height. Beth was wearing a yellow dress that I had never seen. Justin was in a blue suit. I'd be lying if I said Nikki looked better than Beth. Beth was tanned and elegant. However, Nikki was spectacular, and instead of looking elegant or sophisticated, she proudly wore the look of a bad girl. I pulled out a chair for Nikki and sat down myself. Beth and Justin seemed frozen in absolute shock. I looked around with feigned surprise. Very nice. Most gyms are less fancy. Justin's face darkened, and he glared at Nikki. It's a dress. You spent the money. No, I said sharply. I bought it. I threw a stack of photos of the cabin on the table. They were the most unsightly ones I could choose. Most of the pictures I took were much kinder. After all, they were beautiful people. I went through the stack and pulled out the worst. They looked sad, clumsy, and dirty. I got back part of my deposit for a bungalow in a Mexican seaside resort that I was going to surprise Beth with on our anniversary. Since that's not going to happen, I decided to buy something useful. Something flashed across Beth's face. Disappointment? Maybe. Probably after learning that there was more money than she thought. Looking at the spread out photos, Justin finally felt the danger. And he was stunned. Beth turned pale. So how long? We have been working together for almost 4 months now. How did you find out everything? Actually, I didn't need to find out anything. You didn't even try to hide it. You just assumed that we would be too depressed or too weak to do anything. Justin tried to regain some balance and sneered. So, did you fall in love with each other? Nikki chuckled. I don't like him at all. He's a complete bastard. And she's a real bitch. I don't like her at all. Nikki's predatory smile grew wider and wider. Oh, my God. It's amazing. All the nasty things you can imagine. She looked at Beth with a death stare. And a hell of a lot of things you'd never do. I know for sure that it is not. Beth recoiled as if from a slap in the face and looked at me. You can't do this. We try to work together. Well, that was complete nonsense. I laughed, but without any mirth. You stood there until that asshole was ready. And she made love to him 3 or 4 times a week while I was babysitting the girls and living like a fucking monk. For several months, people came to my office to tell me the bad news. Not only did you cheat, but you turned it into a fucking public spectacle. We didn't need to keep an eye on you to catch you. Everything was at a glance. I could feel the anger building fast, but Nikki squeezed my leg. Nikki was cooler this time. She took over. Obviously, the divorces will be for adultery. It won't make any difference in money, but let's face it, it's more honest. And it will make us feel better. My new hobby will be making sure that everyone gets copies of the photos and a full explanation of how you ruined your marriages. Family, colleagues, employers. Damn. I'll find your Sunday school teacher in the 1st grade. She focused on Justin for a second. By the way, asshole, I'm moving in with my sister for now. With Jamie. Straightening my head, I threw the ball in. A little more serious for you is the fact that the two of you embezzled money from a building materials account at a construction company. It took us a long time to figure it out, but when Nikki realized that you two were spending time like sailors on vacation, we realized that the money had to come from somewhere. Nikki and I have gathered more than enough evidence. There are tax problems, wire fraud, even one case of mail fraud. So even if Justin's cousin doesn't mind, you have a real problem. 5 to 10 years in prison will probably be enough for you. I pointed at Justin. And a couple of years in prison as an accomplice for you, Beth. Beth opened her eyes wide and immediately tried to justify herself. I didn't know. I thought it was his money. I put it in the account to keep them from getting divorced. I cut her off. Yes, you kept it for a friend. Besides, it puts that money on a par with our divorce. If my name was on this account, I would assume that you set me up. It would have ended very badly. Beth and Justin turned pale. I suspected they were considering the idea, but apparently decided against it. I made a counteroffer that Nikki and I had already worked out. You have one chance for a better future. Justin, grab it. Quit your job and head for the mountains. At least 400 kilometers. Take the car, clothes, football trophies, and the yearbook. Nothing else. Not a single damn thing. Nikki is filing for divorce. She's not going to get a damn thing out of the divorce anyway, given your secret deal with your cousin. We're not testifying to the cops or your cousin. If your cousin finds out about this himself and takes some action, it will be your problem. I would advise you to put all the money you still have back into his firm's account. It may make a difference in whether he starts looking for you. I looked at Beth. I'm filing for divorce. I have primary custody, no alimony, and no maintenance, with adultery as the cause. You either agree to this or you go to jail, and I just take full custody. As for all our shit, make a list of everything you want, but it better be short. You can leave your clothes, and you can keep all those damn shoes. Nikki intervened. He offered me your stuff, but the shoes are too small and the clothes suck. I stopped wearing underwear next to him, so you can keep your granny panties. I smiled at Nikki while Beth tried her best not to choke. I continued, get a fucking job, move in with your parents or whoever, I don't care. You're going to have a lot of dates with the kids. I won't block it. You were a half-decent mom. I won't even tell your parents what the reason for the divorce is. I looked them in the eye carefully to make sure they were paying attention to me. The time expires tomorrow at midnight. If Justin's fucking ass isn't on the fucking road by then, we'll turn everything over to his cousin and the cops. The offer remains valid only if you both agree. Nikki leaned forward, flaunting her spectacular cleavage. Probably for Beth's sake. You guys have managed one amazing achievement. It's just the two of us. We were serious when we said we had nothing in common. We couldn't agree on a movie, we hated each other's music, and if he had talked about his hobbies, I would have fallen into a coma. And she's a shallow, emotional harpy whose voice grates on my nerves like broken glass. I added. Nikki continued, looking into Justin's eyes like a snake at its prey. So when we got together and didn't figure out how to use you, we only did one thing. If we had dinner together, it was only to gain strength and make love again. I can't believe you dumped him for that piece of shit. I'm not bluffing. If that's what you think, come with us sometime and you can watch. It's probably going to get even hotter this way, if it's even possible. I looked at my watch and interrupted her. Remember the deal. Sorry, we have to go so I can pick up the kids. I stood up and held out my hand to Nikki. She obeyed and leaned towards them, telling me, come on, we'll make love again. We'll stop on the way back, and I'll make love in every possible way. A hateful woman. Although she wasn't lying or exaggerating, we stayed at a hotel, and she was absolutely nuclear hot. Apparently, after telling Justin and Beth everything, she turned on full power. She actually pulled the dress over her head when I opened the hotel door and came in wearing only high heels. Following her example, my clothes were thrown off next to her dress on the floor in a matter of seconds. In fact, there were no conversations at all, except for the obligatory moans, wheezes, and screams. An hour later, we were on our way home. We had outdone ourselves. Something had changed in Nikki, maybe. It was the confrontation with Justin and Beth, but the insane anger seemed to have disappeared. He just left. Beth almost beat me to it. Just put the kids to bed when she burst through the front door. And she fell silent. I purposely didn't take a shower, and I smelled like Nikki and Beth always had a sensitive nose. The air freshener was a major player in keeping our secret. We need to talk. I sank into an overstuffed armchair. We needed to talk a few months ago. Listen, can we step back a little? You can't just let this fool destroy us. Stop. I raised my hand. The only fool who ruined the marriage is standing in front of me. She stared at me with a particularly nasty look, a rarity for her. You really don't understand, Beth. Compared to Justin, your fate is just lovely. Nikki bargained for you, cajoled and begged for you. She was trying to make Justin the real villain in this mess. And you have no idea how hard it was for her. She hated you with every fiber of her being, but she did it anyway. She feels that her train wreck was the cause of ours. I'm not even sure I agree with that, but I made a deal. Because she begged me. I paused, drying my anger before it exploded. Then in measured tones. If the money laundering account had been opened in my name, or if the DNA analysis of the twins had turned out to be different, we would not have talked. The foundation of the Fifth Street factory is being poured there, and I have a copy of the key to the site. You and the asshole would just disappear. Nikki could have begged for anything, but it wouldn't have mattered. She blinked, suddenly realizing with horror how alone we were. How much time do I have to move out? I have to give you until midnight tomorrow, just for the fucking elegant symmetry of it all, but I'll give you a week. It will take 2 days to pack all these shoes. And God knows, I want them to disappear. She mumbled something like an apology and headed up the stairs. It took her 5 days to move out, and I was left alone with the kids. Even with the twins, everything seemed pretty empty. I heard Justin's cousin is looking for him, but won't call the police. I hope Justin hid well. His cousin was always violent. I may have slightly changed my promise not to tell his cousin anything. 2 weeks after that, I allowed the twins to stay with Beth and her parents for the weekend. They clearly knew the rules, and Beth also clearly understood that the retribution for any nonsense would be a quick trip to prison. It was almost midnight when there was a knock on the door. When I opened it, Nikki was standing there in full war paint and club clothes, looking almost giddy. At least someone was adapting. So she's gone? I nodded. She returned to her parents, trying to explain the mysterious copy of the divorce petition, on which "Cheating, stay at home" was written in bright red lipstick. "Thank you for sending it." Nikki grinned her crazy smile. "Great. I wanted to do something nice for her. Let's give them something to talk about." I chuckled. I promised not to tell Beth's parents anything, but Nikki didn't promise. In fact, she promised the opposite. So a whole series of packages were sent to Beth's friends and family, with photos. I doubt she'll ever really get over it. Nikki's smile widened even more. "Hey, I brought a housewarming gift." I almost corrected her. After all, I hadn't moved, but she was right about something. The house seemed new. "I think we could share dessert." A familiar face in a light-colored cap peeked out from behind her. I brought a puff pastry cream. Poor Amber. She didn't have much experience, and the two of us shared her like candy, which she essentially was. We dragged her into our storm. She was not so much a partner as a catalyst on an open fire. Not that she was complaining. After everything Nikki and I have done to each other in recent months, we were able to give Amber a degree course she passed out twice. Nikki was smiling like the cat that ate the canary. The next morning, she helped Amber, who could barely walk on shaky legs, out to her car. A few nights later, Nikki came alone. A few days later, she came with Jamie. When the children fell asleep, she silently dragged me straight to the bedroom. We were moving slower this time, much slower. Then I lay staring at the ceiling, and her head rested on my shoulder while her finger drew a pattern on my chest. "We can't keep this up, Nikki." I felt her tense up. I continued. "We kind of agreed. I know we never talked about it directly, but I think we agreed that we have nothing in common. No feelings. And I have a problem with that." Silence. Then quietly, "Bastard." Then I felt her crazy, familiar smile at my shoulder as her fingernail traced a heart above mine. "You must have been a dumb kid. Did they have to invite a specialist to teach you how to walk?" Beth might not be burned enough, but it was Nikki's choice. And Nikki is complicated and possibly insane, so it's very difficult to understand her choice. Maybe she believes in a small chance of salvation, at least for some. Or maybe she wants Beth to see what she's lost. Make no mistake, Beth has lost everything she really valued. Nikki was pretty damn sure of that. And I'm sure Nikki wouldn't have been so pleased if Beth had been in jail. Nikki wouldn't have been able to enjoy the show. Nikki will even have real control over Beth's access to her own daughters. After a while, all of this, starting from that first day when she stood in the rain, may have been her plan from the very beginning. To be honest, I'm not sure and I don't want to ask. She can just answer. Nikki has a permanent place in my heart. She might not be as pretty as Beth, but so what? She loves fiercely and completely and won't let go until she crumbles to dust. She has brought Amber back many times, but Amber is not a threat to the relationship. She is what Nikki wants to share with the man she loves. As Nikki said, Amber is pretty much a treat, that extra piece of cheesecake that you can't eat on your own, but you're happy to share. Nikki is just expressing her love in a slightly unconventional way. Sure, she's manipulative and crazy, maybe even dangerous, but she's her.